Rise up, O flame, by thy lights glowing. Bring to us beauty, wisdom, and joy. It had been a very rainy spring in Numberland. The rain had been falling for days and days and days, it felt like. Now, the trees were happy, the grass was happy, everything was green, the flowers were coming out, the birds were playing in the puddles. But there were some who were not so happy, and that was the poor mining gnomes, for all that rain had washed down into the caves and created mud, and all that mud had caused a cave-in, and they had a lot of extra work to do to start digging out the cave again. And they were worried they would fall behind on collecting their gems. But the one who was the most worried was poor Queen Aquarius. She thought her people might not to be able to have food or have their needs met. Oh my, what would happen to her citizens? So she gathered around her trusted advisors and asked them what could happen. Tabor Times and Donna Divide and Maya Minus and Peter Plus, they all came, and she told them of the problem. Well, they thought on it, and of course they said, "We'll go help. We'll solve the problem. Don't worry, Queen." And so they set off on their way. Well, they arrived at the mines and they got right to work. They had shovels and pickaxes, and they began to dig and dig. But even in spite of their hard work, they began to have some trouble. Poor Maya fell down right away and got her whole cloak muddy and was covered in slimy mud that she didn't like so very much. Peter Plus was steadily working away, but his tummy kept grumbling, and he couldn't help himself but ask, "When is snack time? When is lunch time?" Now, Tabor Times was quite helpful as well, but he was working so quickly that he kept dropping his pickaxe in the mud and couldn't find it. And then he would go help somebody and get distracted and forget what he was doing, and it was quite troublesome. Now, Donna Divide, she was a steady worker too, but all she could think about was how she should be in the kitchen chopping up vegetables, and that digging in a mine wasn't the place for her. Now, they were somewhat helpful, but the lead miner said, "I think this is perhaps not the place for you to be helping. What I would like help with is to organize and count our supply of gems." For he was worried that some had gotten buried in the cave-in or had been lost, so he wanted to make sure that they were all accounted for. So he showed them the pile, and they set to work. Now, they right away began to count onto the table, carrying gems, counting them out, all of them working. 1, 2, 3, 14, 15. Now Maya was counting steadily, but Tabor kept distracting her and asking what number was she on, and would it be faster to count by fives? And she kept losing her own count, and Peter Plus as well. Did she have 16? Or did he have 15? And they kept having to start over. Well, Maya almost began to cry, and Peter had to offer her the corner of his cloak to dry her tears on. "Oh my," said Donna, "this is going to take us a whole week. We won't have been helpful at all." What are we going to do? Now they thought, and then Donna had an idea. She had been watching as Tabor was saving time, gathering handfuls of gems at a time. She said, let's gather them into a group and count them that way. She looked around and saw in the corner a pile of burlap sacks, small burlap sacks, just right for 10 gems. She said, let's count out 10 and put each 10 into a sack. And then we'll know which ones have been counted, and that will help us. So they began to work together. Peter would first count out 10 gems. Maya would carefully put them into the sack. Tabor would take the sack and dash over to set it in the storeroom, and then dash back to get more gems. And he kept moving so quickly he stayed right up with them. And Donna, she kept an eagle eye on everything to make sure their count was correct, and she kept a tally of how many sacks they had filled. Well, pretty soon they were moving as smoothly as an oiled machine, and they finished the whole pile of gems. They looked at the sacks, and Donna saw that they had filled 8 sacks. And she looked at the table, and there Peter had the last gems. There weren't quite enough to fill a sack. He just had 7 sitting there. So she thought, 8 sacks with 10 in each one. She could count by tens. 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80. There were 80 gems they had put into those sacks. And with Peter plus his extra 7, there were 87 jewels. Well, no need to double check. They had been so careful. So they let the mining gnomes that they had finished their job. And the cave was just being emptied out of mud, and they were just starting to wipe it down and get it sparkling clean again. So the 4 friends walked home, and the rain itself was starting to let up, and a little sunshine was peeking through. And they made it home in time for a bowl of Donna's delicious root vegetable stew and some warm rolls on the side. And they agreed that they had come up with a good plan together and were proud of their work that day. Snip, snap, snout, this tale is told.